Well, surprisingly, everyone got settled much quicker than I expected, so I will begin. A very warm welcome and a very good morning to everyone who's joined us here today. And you'll all be witnessing the launch of our white paper that is titled Roadmap for Demand Flexibility in India. This event is organized by Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. A very sincere thanks from my side to the entire AEEE family for gathering and putting this event together for us to be on a common pedestal to share ideas, debate, and bring about a bigger change. I'll also like to extend my thanks to the team at AutoGrid India for supporting AEEE in organizing this event very seamlessly. My name is Afsha Kansal and I'll be hosting the event for you today. AEEE has been pioneering work on energy efficiency for over a decade in partnership with a broad base of private sector industry members and power sector stakeholders. Demand flexibility, commonly referred to as DF, is the ability of the demand side to respond and alter the energy consumption in accordance with grid requirement. Demand side is considered the most widespread energy source available in the distribution grid. Flexible demand programs, globally also referred to as demand response programs, are proven solutions for ensuring a reliable power supply, reducing the cost of supply, and optimizing investments in the electricity network. Utilities in India are yet to capitalize on the value proposition offered by flexible demand. In today's session, we'll have two major segments. The first segment is going to witness the launch of the white paper, and in the next segment, we'll have a panel discussion with a few esteemed panelists we have amongst us today, and we also have a few joining us a little late. So at this time, it's with great privilege that I'm going to start inviting our esteemed guests for the inaugural session. Can I first call on stage Mr. Atul Kumar Bali. He is presently serving as the Director at National Smart Grid Mission. He has over 32 years of experience in the power sector. His experience spans design, engineering, monitoring, and successful implementation of SCADA, EMS, and DMS projects. He's worked with NHPC, Power Grid, PFC, and is presently working with the National Smart Grid Mission since 2015 to plan and monitor implementation of policies and programs related to smart grid activities in India. He's also been associated from concept to commissioning of Unified Load Dispatch and Communication Scheme, facilitating one nation, one grid, and one frequency. It's a pleasure to have you, sir. Please join us on stage. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Arvind Gujral. He works as a consulting director at Bijli Technologies and AutoGrid. He is an IIT-IIM professional with over 20 years of experience in the power sector and 8 years at the CXO level. He played a vital role in transforming distribution utilities across matrix. Currently, he's consulting with new tech companies in artificial intelligence and machine learning, primarily focusing on the power sector. Welcome, sir. Please join us on stage. Next, we have Mr. Vish Ganti, who's going to be joining us virtually from California. He's currently serving as the Vice President and General Manager for AutoGrid India and is responsible for growing AutoGrid's business in the region, leveraging the artificial intelligence-driven AutoGrid Flex platform. As a passionate advocate for open standards, Vish has nearly a decade of success working with utilities, ISOs, and CNI websites to develop automated demand response, helping them expand their open ADR technology solution adoption in distributed resources. Can we please have Vish join us?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Vish. Next, I'd like to invite on stage Dr. Satish Kumar, who's currently serving as the President and Executive Director at Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. He holds a PhD from Carnegie Mellon and a B.Arch from IIT Roorkee. He was nominated for an executive leadership program at Harvard Business School and the University of North Carolina. He is a member of TEEP's Energy Efficiency Task Force under the Montreal Protocol, is a lead fellow, energy certified manager, and certified measurement and verification professional. Please join us, sir. Next, I'd like to call upon Dr. Bhaskar Natarajan, who is currently serving as the Director Program at AEEE. He holds over 25 years of experience working on various aspects of sustainable development and the power sector. He has worked for both the government and the private sector in his past journey. Welcome, sir. Last but not the least, I'd like to invite Chandana, who is currently serving as the technical consultant at AEEE. She holds over 9 years of experience and expertise in demand-side management, electric mobility, and distributed energy resources. A big round of applause for the lady on the dais, please. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everyone. So I'm going to very quickly jump into the inaugural session and invite here Dr. Satish to give his opening remarks for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Afsha, and a very warm welcome to dignitaries on the dais and also people in the audience for making it to this program. And very good evening to Vish, who is in California. So we are eagerly looking forward to, I think, your remarks and presentation here. My role is to sort of like welcome all of you and just provide a little bit of context in terms of why at AEEE we truly believe that demand flexibility is something whose I think a time has come, and I'll just go into a little bit of detail on some of these things. So first of all of us have been reeling under a really hot weather, a big heat wave in India this time of the year, and if you look at the peak demand sort of like projections, it always used to happen around like late June or early July. But because of the severity of the heat wave, we saw that this thing was breached in April, and with more kind of like demand yet to come probably in the traditional time period when the electricity demand peaks. So while we have seen that there is a lot of ink that has been devoted on the supply side in terms of, I think, the coal shortages and how do we keep the lights on. But we also feel that, I think, the demand side, which can be treated as a massive resource for addressing both, I think, easing the pressure on the national grid, but also, I think, in terms of offsetting some of the coal power demand through a much cleaner energy efficiency or demand as a resource. So that's, we believe, is a very important point to be kept in mind. The other thing that I would also like to state here, that India is perhaps, I think, the only country where there is a pressure to decarbonize the grid, while the growth, I think, in the electrical demand is not showing any signs of abating. And I think that poses a very different kind of a challenge for regulators, for policymakers, for distribution companies, for technology providers. Because on one side, I think the demand can likely double, I think the peak demand probably in the next like 15 to 20 years. And yet at the same time, there is considerable pressure to absorb the renewable energy into the grid, make the grid cleaner and more reliable, more cost optimal. So this is a very unique situation that we are, I think, is seeing in India. And that's why the possibility of really starting to look at the demand flexibility side is really pertinent, and at a time when we believe, I think, there are massive tailwinds to push this agenda. The second thing that I would just like to, which I alluded to, is that our Prime Minister has made a commitment for 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel-powered electricity to come into the grid. And that, I think, yeah, as all of us know, I think is going to pose another significant challenge in terms of like when that kind of, I think, renewable energy is going to get pushed into the grid, then how do we actually make sure that in terms of operation, in terms of reliability, and in terms of peak shaving and managing the grid, I think in a better way, I think what is the role that, again, demand side can play. And the third thing that I would like to say is that I think India is now rightly so perceived as a power surplus or power adequate. I think this is a term that I think more and more people are saying that let's not use power surplus, because there is a set of latent demand that is not getting fully tapped in because of other structural issues with the power sector. But there is, I think, a sufficient power demand, and yet I think if we run into these kind of situations that we ran this summer. So some of the states like UP and Bihar, they are continuing to experience power shortages, even though I think government's focus on making, I think, all the states and all the villages power adequate. And what it has led to is some of the interventions by regulators, which I think, in our opinion, I think is sending mixed signals. I think so. CRC intervened right now, I think just a few days or like a couple of weeks ago, where they said that I think the maximum power clearing pricing has to come down from 20 rupees per kilowatt hour to 12 rupees per kilowatt hour. And now, of course, I think CRC is looking from kind of a public goods perspective. They don't want the customers to actually pay a very high price. And yet at the same time, I think what we are seeing that can, I think, peak power be delivered at 12 rupees per kilowatt hour. Is that a realistic assumption? And if that is not, then what kind of consequences that would lead to? So I think these are some of the issues, I think, that has been brought forth with some of the things that has happened in the recent past. And these are, I'm sure that these are some of the things that I think our esteemed panelists are also going to cover in some degree of detail. So my last point that I would like to make is that in order for a truly kind of like a distributed energy resource, whether that is energy efficiency or demand side flexibility, or whether it's energy storage, these are the two things that we talk about. What is the regulatory framework? What is the capital investment or something that is being put into place which gives confidence to the utilities that they are not going to get hurt if they are going to invest in some of these issues. So in that sense, I think I'm sure that people are going to talk about some of the pilot projects that are happening and which are creating the data that is going to be needed by, I think, distribution companies, by public sector distribution company, which are a little bit behind in terms of, I think, what needs to be done, whereas private sector companies are really taking the lead in implementing some of these pilot projects. And also, more importantly, what kind of data the regulators, the system operators need to see to make sure that they start to get the confidence that, I think, whether it's like 1% of the total peak demand that can come online at the time of, I think, when it is needed, and that is considered as a reliable resource. So the last point that I would make is that what can be done beyond, I think there is grid code that was launched in 2010, which made that, okay, utilities need to come out with demand side management programs. But we have seen over the last, I think, 10 years, there has not been significant number of programs happening. Similarly, CRC has come out with the ancillary services regulation recently. So we are also hopeful that that will actually lead to, I think, more demand flexibility. Of course, the aggregation is 1 megawatt or higher for that, I think, for that ancillary services regulation. But it's a pretty good start. I think it's going to send the right signal. And then going beyond that, can there be things that can be done where performance-based regulations are some things that the regulators can start to think about, which will lead to, I think, more utilities, more technology companies, and I think more organizations like AEEE to work in this arena and try to make demand flexibility a reality. So thank you very much. Again, a very warm welcome to all of you. And back to you, Afsha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Satish. Well, I'll also like to very quickly extend a thank you to all the people who are going to be viewing this session through a live streaming that's going on YouTube. So we definitely have a little larger audience than the number of people we are here. Next, it's my immense pleasure to be welcoming Mr. Vish Ganti to step in and set the context around demand flexibility. Over to you, Vish.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to the esteemed panel as well as all the attendees in person there in Delhi and on online. Unfortunately, I cannot be there in India, but I'm there in spirit, so it's great, and I have a wonderful team on site. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them questions. So I'm really happy to to culminate some of the work that we did over the pandemic, especially with AEEE working through the initial aspects of this research work. But we really thought it was an opportune time to educate the market really around uh, what are the alternative solutions available. There is a mad rush to solve the problem of power crisis in India through rushing coal through every single train. Uh, I think we believe that we beg to differ that there are better ways of solving the problem. Demand flexibility is by and large untapped in India, and we believe there's at least uh, at least 20 to 30 gigawatts worth of demand flexibility related in India. But the art in uncovering that is to create the programs, the market regulations, and policies that facilitate this latent demand to be brought to bear in demand response type of programs. And while there's a lot of action happening on electric mobility and batteries, and no offense, like I really love these products, but the real thing is the most cost-effective DER today is demand response. The most widely available DER is actually demand response, and recognized by the industry leaders. And so this white paper really focuses on how demand response is a stepping stone and the starting point for any utility who starts their journey in this digital transformation space, and tries to get through more efficiency in operations, not just through improvements on the grid infrastructure side, but actually reducing the need to even maintain as much, because you're effectively optimizing the grid for on a daily basis for operations. And we think that the demand response plays a very critical tool, is a tool in the toolkit overall in solving this overall problem. And there's a few more things, and we'll get into this, and don't want to steal the thunder for the rest of the presenters. But I do want to say that not all DR is automated. What happened in India, based on our observation, was we tend to fall into the pitfall that everything that's out there has to be automated DR, and the problem with that is it makes it extremely expensive, and as we observed as a company deploying these solutions for over a decade around the world, uh, we realized that behavioral demand response coupled with automated demand response is the right portfolio mix that utilities need to start thinking of, and start with the basics, get the fundamentals right, get the business models right, and start enticing customers to automate their load so that they can become more valuable and more predictable in their load sharing. Another very important dimension that I do want to bring up is the fact that India is installing a lot of smart meters. And in most of these deployments, we talk a lot about the value to the utility and the discom, but we seldom leave the value to the consumer. How are consumers benefiting if a smart meter is installed? What is the value that they get? And the answer is really taking and tapping into the data, showing them the transparency, and showing them the data. See this data, they can participate in programs, and really turn that data into rewards and earnings that they can also feel feel empowered to be part of this mission. And last but not least, the fact that iPhones are actually cost effective in India, and so are a lot of like solar panels are cost effective in India. 5 years ago, these were not. I mean, these are really expensive products. And with the innovation and technology, I'm a strong believer that the cost price point can be extremely competitive and can be commercialized. And in fact, with a cost sensitive economy like India, small incentives could go a very long way in attracting a large population of people for participating in these programs, right? And we've seen lotteries and all these other things as growing up in India, and I think those grassroots level strategies will work even for this kind of an approach, and we are really wanting to pioneer that with local marketplace. So with that, I think those were some of the highlights that I wanted to hit, and we will we have a wonderful report that goes into more detail. Uh, but the fundamental things are enabling technologies that are getting commercialized and widely available and accessible, and we are here to actually take all of our learnings from the global market and deploy that in Indian context. Akshay, over back to you.
Thank you, Vish. A big round of applause, everyone. Well, next up we have Mr. Atul Kumar Bali, who's going to be delivering a special address. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Hassan. And namaskar and good morning to all. And I think it's a privilege rather to be here amongst the, I think, experts. And I must congratulate this association, rather Alliance for Energy Efficient, that they have come out with such a report. And I think it's the right time for that. We happen to be there in US. I met Vish there at their autogrid facility. And we have gone through their, I think, the very pertinent question what the CEO of the autogrid at that time asked, what is the relevance, where you want to go ahead? And I think this is the opportune time. Why I'm saying opportune time? Not because we are going to launch that white paper or something like that, but the fact is now the enabling network which we have come across, and that is very much ready, and that is very much ready to take off further. Like 250 million smart meters are going to be installed. We have gone through the pilots. We have tested numerous smart grid functionalities that, and we have tested also the PLM, other thing like that. But actually the demand response, that feature has also been tested. But now when the case comes of the use case of particular, in effect, when we are going to do it in real, actually demonstrate in the field, then there comes the challenge. I happen to see AutoGrid has done a pilot in Tata Power, along with, I think, a few customers of 2,000 nearly, and they have tested, I think, 15 megawatt of that they have able to manage that. But actually the cost benefit, other analysis which has to come further, that will take us further. But what is the relevance in Indian context? As rightly told, I think Dr. Satish has put up very relevant case in that, because India has a target. I was just going to the data. Nearly at this moment, we have 400 gigawatt of installed capacity, nearly to the tune of that. And out of that, 30% is from the non-fossil fuels. And we are what we are targeting at? We are targeting 500 gigawatt of just non-fossil fuel by the 2030. You can imagine the targets. Of course, last 4 or 5 years, we have gone through, we have been done a lot in solar and other things like that. And now we have come to the tune of nearly 40% of total share of that RE, or you can say the entire non-fossil energy. Now taking further and to manage that and taking care of this intermittent problem and all that, I happen to go through the report also, what you have submitted. I just gone through the glimpses of that and very happy to note, and they have come across the demand response design, another thing, how, what will the benefit, what is the case study, and how to go further in case of Indian countries where the, I think too much dormant demand is there, too much latency is there, and so much latent demand, more so latent demand. Why we are saying? You see, nearly last 4 or 5 years, we have rather touched to the non-accessible areas and nearly 4 crore consumers. You can take in the case of 400 million, rather you can say in the numbers, if you say in the million and all that, not 40 million. That we have touched up with those who don't have any electricity in the last 70 or 7 decades, you can say 70 years or 7 decades. So they've also come to that, 4. And now, as rightly put up, that this is a summer season. The peak demand is rising like anything. I think Delhi has crossed more than 5,000 megawatt this time. But the sudden load shift and all that, when it comes into play, like the 6 or 7 days back or 10 days back, we have been discussing just before starting this session, and earlier also we discussed that. Suddenly load dip. And because of that, because of rain and sudden western disturbances, we have been able to match that. It's a good thing for us to have in Delhi to have a respite from summer, but it's a nightmare for the system operators to how to manage that. So if the demand response, as we go through the report, and others very well realize that now it has come through, I think, technological intervention. This DR is coming as a dispatchable resource. If we're able to tap that, and there is a source for that, so we can variable the model which has been given by the 4S of that. That is, you say that it is shift and shed also and shimmy, and also they have given it basically you can also systematize that. So these all 4S's that can be integrated and that can be really realized. Then naturally there is an ample scope for this intervention or demand response as a dispatchable resource. And coming with this, I think software and other things we look forward. So these all things encompass into the very particular pertinent case for dispatchable resources or a demand response as such. So this is the right time, I think, to go further in this regard. And there is ample ecosystem available because smart meters which are coming into way that will be able to enable that. And ultimately the end consumer, because if the end consumer is not able to realize the benefit, and even the regulatory provision and even the Electricity Act 2003, that provision for that. But provisioning is one thing, and next thing is making it happen. Even from NSGM perspective, we have been, rather, as I already told, in smart grid pilots, we try to demonstrate that. But we have also submitted to DRC also rather a regulatory sandboxing or regulatory experimentation in that regard to have a demand responsibility or demand flexibility on actually in field. But that is the real challenge, because in pilots we demonstrate some cost benefit in an intangible way, but when there is a deliverables, when there is a tangible benefits, as we have done in also in smart meters, and I was just discussing in Ajmer, we have tested a business case of a smart meters, how they will be able to realize the benefit. If there is something deliverable and tangible, then utility come across. And as we are moving further, and NSGM is also taking the smart grid initiative further from Ministry of Power in perspective, in that case we'll be able to take certain pilots, and we are thinking of realizing that to happen along with the other utilities and all that. And if that happens, and in that case, if the technological experts or let's say the software aggregator, because I was going through the web portal in the RRBL, so rightly put across, demand response is when it happens. It happens when utility, aggregator or a grid operator facilitates that to an end consumer. If facilitation is there and consumer is able to shift their load, utilize the TOU tariffs and other things, and if there is a proper ecosystem that we have to establish, that is what is ecosystem when we refer, a typical cost benefit analysis that is tangible. Other thing is consumer is empowered to do that, and that through smart meter will be easily there. And there is, you can say that DR environment or DR, you can say ecosystem, and what we say is that there is a standardization, regulatory framework is there, then everything comes on same page. And that is, I think, where we have to go further. And I was going through the report, some, I think, contents I have seen. They have, I think, I will look forward to going through the report and, of course, the panel session also. I think the critical factor, design and incentive models, that will be more, I think, look forward to going through that. And how to enable that DR program in our utilities, because utilities have a different take in, they don't have the funds. Of course, that's why the smart metering, what we are adopting or going further. And that is why we are thinking of a pinch of salt, and every utility is coming forward. The government has, I think, nearly 1,50,000 crores for that as an outlay. So basically it's an OPEX model, or the DB foot model we have taken forward. And in that case, I think if this type of DR, that is, we have also provisioned in the RFP also, and we are able to realize that, I think then that will be a real case to take further. And I think coming back to further, this demand flexibility and that too demand response as a dispatchable resource, I think that will be a great thing to move forward. And this is the right time. And I thank again Dr. Satish and Arvindji, who's from AutoGrid is there. I think AutoGrid has been, I think, played a key role in this demonstrating that, showing the pilots also in that regard. So I think that will be a good way to proceed further, and will definitely, as from I think government perspective and perspective, will be happy to associate further in this regard. And I must congratulate the entire team which have brought together this report. And it's a happy, I think, rather you can say meeting with Dr. Natarajan, who has been associated with PSD in that regard. We have been working with them in USAID and other programs, and now coming through AE also, and gone through the web portal and everything, and works over nearly, I think, 14 years or so in this direction. So I'm happy to have that in front of me, and I congratulate the entire team who has brought this report, and look forward to this interactive session in the next thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So now is the time when I'm going to request my panel to please launch the white paper. I request Ishan to hand over a copy each. Well, this is the moment, guys. Can I request everyone to please launch the white paper, stand up, and can we have a big round of applause for the entire team who's put an effort to write this paper. Wish, I hope you're not feeling left out.
A classic FOMO moment, but
We've arranged
really
an
happy to
Amazon
see this.
delivery for you. It should be there any minute.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, flexible demand resources are considered amongst the cheapest options to maintain reliable grid operation while reducing the economic impacts of network expansion. If India is to achieve the target set up at the COP26, also popularly as we refer to the Panchamrit that we have in hand, we must start looking towards harnessing the potential of flexible demand-side resources. I'm definitely not the best person to be talking more in detail, so I'm going to invite the authors of the white paper, Ms. Chandana and Mr. Ishan Band from AEEE, to please walk us through the findings in detail. A big round of applause for the authors, please. Thank you.
Let's not forget Vish is also one of the co-authors for this report. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Afsha, and thank you, everyone. At the very beginning, I would like to thank AEEE for giving me this opportunity to present the launch of a white paper at such a stage. Next in line, I would definitely like to thank my mentor, Ms. Chandana. She has been guiding me since almost 2 years now, and she has been a stronghold for whatever research I have been able to accomplish. Just hold on a second. Share the presentation here. Vish, I'm hoping you are able to see the screen.
Yep, I can. I
Great.
can. Yeah, but I think you're. I think you just switch your display.
Display settings, yeah. Display settings. Duplicate slide.
Yeah, swap. Swap. Yeah. Yeah, perfect.
So, thank you everyone for being present here. Without further ado, I would just like to, dive what the white paper actually consists of. And so, yep. All right. So beginning with the contents of the white paper, what the white paper actually is trying to go through, we are trying to, initiate the discussion of demand response in India, basically the more advanced demand, flexible demand in India, what role it would be holding for India's energy future, and how actually demand side management and demand response has evolved through the time, why it would be an essential tool for the utility DSM as well as EE resource, what are the factors that actually are required to make a program successful, and how can discoms, or basically the utilities in India, can follow a certain pathway to enable such kind of tools for better network management and optimizing their network expansion costs. So to begin with, I would say the best definition or the best categorization of demand response was actually done by LBNL, in which they have done through defining the 4S of DRs, that is the shape, shift, shed and shimmy. And these are basically based on the timelines of the impact they would create on the utility and the network. Shape is basically more on how energy efficiency and behavioral tools shape through a longer timeline, whereas shift and shed are closely related to the time period from ranging from minutes to days. And when we talk of shimmy, it's basically the frequent ramping and up and down of the demand resources. Why they are basically important is shifting of demand side would be highly I would say critical when we are integrating a lot of renewable energy, which are basically variable in nature and intermittent in nature. They are able to reduce the peak demand impact that the grid have, flatten the load duration curve a bit, and demand response tools actually can avoid network capacity expansion as well, provide a few of the emergency as well as ancillary support services that the grid requires. As of now, I would say most of the technology do exist for demand response to be a viable tool. We have, a high penetration of smart meters. Everyone of, I mean, all of us have smartphones in our hand. Wi-Fi, and definitely IoT is gaining traction as in the coming years. So the technological aspect exists in today's date to enable the demand side tools, and what we would be requiring in the future is to how to target the right end users, and what would be the critical load that we need to target. Like there are electric vehicles, and there's a cooling load as well. So moving on, the entire regulatory aspect and how the discoms are able to cover this roadmap, this would be presented by my mentor, Ms. Chandana Shashidharan. Please welcome.
Thank you, Ishan. So taking the conversation ahead, one of the important factors that will determine the success of demand response, as electricity is a very regulated business, is to understand how regulators are actually looking at demand response. So in India, everybody knows we have DSM regulations. We don't have a lot of definitions for DR in the state DSM regulations in India, but we actually have a good precedence in India, which is actually coming from the central regulator. This came in 2010, Indian Grid Code, though we don't have a lot of acceptance for this definition, but we would want to present it as one of the most promising and one of the most forward definition that is available for demand response. Because the regulator actually talks about how demand response is a resource that can help in managing the grid, to offer grid support in terms of frequency, in reduction of congestion charges which is associated particularly in periods we are experiencing peak demand, and finally also a contingency or an emergency situation. We can also compare this with what is perhaps the global most accepted or most forward definition of demand response, that is from the federal regulator in USA, and they have also defined demand response in what the consumer can do in variation to the price of electricity and the system reliability being jeopardized. The point that we want to put forward here is, it is important to have a good regulatory definition in place as the first step for us to enable the acceptance that demand is actually a good resource ahead, and this translation that the central regulator is actually aware of that demand is actually a good resource from the grid perspective, there is a lot of effort that is required to bring it down to the states and actually to the discoms, so that they can avail benefit under it. A short overview on how DR value proposition can appeal to the discom. Everybody is aware of the negawatt perspective on saying that the cleanest energy is the energy you never use, definitely, and which will support the discoms in avoiding costlier procurements. But we also wanted to emphasize that often hidden is the indirect cost of energy that actually comes in what is the fixed cost of power, what is the cost of flexibility associated, what is the cost of grid flexibility needed for it. These are conversations that rarely happen in this occasion. On top of it, we have RE penetration, we have increasing peak demand. We also forget about the need of the distribution system upgrade that is happening, which also deserves a lot of attention from the DR perspective. And even in terms of how a discom can be carbon neutral, can you avoid emissions, can you avoid thermal power, can you use high RE, all of these are conversations where the DR actually offers a value for a discom. So we did some case studies using data that is available to us for about 7 to 8 states. And from our analysis, we wanted to put across 5 distinct points. The details are definitely discussed in our report. One of the things is that, as we all know, load shedding is a common practice that is still has a lot of acceptance in the Indian ecosystem. And so one of the questions that we would want to put forward is, why not change the concept surrounding shed, and let's focus on more shift, which is also aligned with the decarbonization tool. And we also have a lot of cheap renewable energy coming during the daytime. Without any reduction in the net demand, without any reduction in the revenue, it is possible for the discoms to facilitate DR without any shedding of the land. Secondly, at local level also, we were not really thinking of a discom level operation. Now the term, when I say DSOs, it has gained attention from the Indian context. Earlier, the distribution level operation was not thought of in India, and with the advent of lot of distributed resources, including rooftop solar and others, the time is right to talk about aggregating demand to offer grid support even at the local level. And if the discom is actually able to aggregate at a local level, this can also help the bulk power system, which is also in need of a lot of support, a lot of flexibility to accommodate the high amount of renewable energy that is going to come in, and also to be able to respond to the varying load. Finally, let's also talk about optimization of power procurement for the future planning. Definitely, one of the eye-catching things could be if the discoms are able to get out of their costlier PPAs for expensive peak thermal power plants, wherein they pay a lot of fixed charges, even though their usage is very less. But one of the factors that we have also brought forward is that we have to remember that often the expensive coal plant is not the most emissive power plant, right? Cost and emissions sometimes don't really follow. So when we tried to do our case study in optimization, we also saw that it is possible for a discom with the goal to be carbon neutral or carbon positive. They can also co-optimize, not just from a cost perspective, but also bring in emissions from the power plant into the equation and use DR as a resource to specifically cater critical peak demands, as had just recently happened during a heat wave. A final aspect, which is often not reflected because there are no regulatory challenges in getting a capacity addition passed through, but we need to remember that Indian DISCOM already maintains more than 10 million transformers and 10 million circuit kilometers as a nation. This should be the largest in the world. So when we talk about the capacity addition that are needed, not just in the cities, but also in the towns and further down, on what is needed for the distribution level upgrade to cater to a peak load, which happens for less than 10% of the time, but your entire system needs to be upgraded. So when I take the cost as a nation, this is a significant cost, wherein an application of a DR as a cheap resource might deserve some consideration. And finally, because climate change is a reality for us, we are going to face extreme weather events going ahead, and one of the impact that will have on the power sector is on contingent or emergency situations wherein the demand response actually has a high value. This is a very underexplored area because we don't even know how to estimate what is the cost that is associated with the blackdown that could happen potentially. If DR can prevent the in the blackout, the application for it would be very less number of hours, but that is a huge area which is currently overlooked. So in our opinion, we're just putting across some of the things that we believe that needs to be done to enable DR in India. One of the key elements is to be able to provide regulatory incentives under the current tariff framework, because there is a pass-through mechanism that allows the cost through pass-through to the consumer, even though there is a peak power procurement. We have also seen the central regulator being protective of the consumer for taking a case to prevent a higher escalation of the cost in market. But the reality is that the cost of the peak power procurement is actually high, and we are moving towards a market-based mechanism. So one of the recommendations that we have put forward is if we can go for a performance-based regulatory system wherein we can actually reward DISCOMs for better performance in terms of efficiency improvement, and they are also able to prioritize good initiatives such as DR. Secondly, if we want to have a full-scale launch of a DR program, we need to be very clear on what is the monitoring and verification protocol associated with the DR. And the time is right to have conversations about what the demand response baselining methodology should be to prove that what we have achieved from DR actually as a flexible demand. And the third and most important point is to be able to facilitate demand integration in the market, wherein we believe DISCOMs, because of the nature of their operation, they can also play a bigger role in aggregating the demand for themselves, for their own usage, and also to be able to supply to the bulk power system. And the last term that we would want to put forward is that India already has a proven track record with energy efficiency. We have saved a lot of emissions through it. Can we also think about extending the value of these EE programs with DR? As I am talking this, you all know that the PAT scheme is there, DISCOMs are also covered under the PAT schemes, and energy efficiency is receiving focus. Whereas, if you were to extend the proposition a little bit, we can also bring DR to the picture, which can also do wonders to the operational efficiency improvement of a DISCOM. This is our last slide. This is where we want to stop to give what the roadmap for enabling demand flexibility in India should look like. We should start on what is possible right now. We can talk about behavioral or manual DR, which is cost effective, but there is a lot of potential. Let's also talk about the residential DR and not just think about the commercial and industrial users. There is a lot of storage and electric vehicles and microgrid integration that is actually happening in the low level. This is what we have to start at the short term. Then we move a bit with the availability of advanced data and controls that are possible. We move on to a systems of virtual power plants and distributed energy management systems, wherein RE can also play a big part, the residential storage rooftops and large-scale entities with demand and distributed generation, and everything can come together to take it on a medium term. On the long term, we think a little bit wider. We use AI and data applications. We can get into mechanisms of peer-to-peer trading, predictive asset maintenance, retail operations, and trading and direct marketing. These are not actually very futuristic terms because this is happening right now. But as a roadmap for India, we would definitely want to present these 3 steps. Thank you, everyone, and over to you, Afsha.
Thank you so much, Chandana and Ishan. Next, we have another presentation by Mr. Vish Gandhi. So he's going to walk us through the recent behavioral DR pilot, which was hosted by TPDDL with support from AutoGrid. Over to you, Vish.
Yeah, thank you so much. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Great. So before we get into the actual results and stuff, which is great, and piggybacking on whatever Chandana said, the sequential step-by-step thought process around what a utility needs to do, I think it's really important to discuss that a little bit more so that everybody understands when we say a roadmap, it really is a roadmap. It's a starting stone where you need to start and how you expand on these investments. Before that, quickly, just wanted to make sure that everybody understands who we are as a company at AutoGrid. So AutoGrid has been around for about 10 years. We've been doing projects around the world on various aspects, as you heard. So we started out with demand response being the first and the formidable use case for 10 years ago, right? And what gave birth to it is actually the deployment of smart meters in the US, especially in California here, right? The data fabric that was actually getting installed and deployed here and facilitated the evolution of demand response and thereafter other DER products and services. So what we did was actually started building out a platform that was initially designed for demand response use cases, but today it's actually more widely used for distributed energy resource optimization across the board. And most recently, we were ranked by Guidehouse, or formerly known as Navigant, as the #1 DERMS management platform, as well as the virtual power plant platform. And till date, we've delivered over 37 gigawatt hours of demand management across our global footprint just last year alone, which is very, very substantial compared for a software company that is deploying software on the cloud. So what the approach that we've taken is really to provide a framework that allows companies to start very small. As Chandana said, you want to start with basic demand response, behavioral demand response, but you want the same platform and same investments to pan multiple times, because every single time you bring in a new platform, the cost of integration with your backend enterprise systems is going to will be duplicated. So for example, if a utility is today doing EV charging management system and they already have a charge management software, and tomorrow they want to start managing buildings or microgrids, you don't want to replicate and build another platform for that, because then you will double or triple your actual capex cost in trying to redo this again and again. So this is what we have done, is to allow a platform that can be deployed at a small scale for your small programs, but can be rapidly deployed at a much larger scale. So that's exactly what we're doing here in India also. So we do have a few different components. We have, like I said, the demand response, or DROMS, which we call it. But the secret sauce and where we actually are deploying now is actually what's called a virtual power plant. It is going to these regions which are marginally very highly affected by thermal power plants, which are located close to areas which are where the demand centers are. And we're saying that we can replace an entire peaking power plant with a virtual power plant, bringing the people into this mix and bringing devices into the mix. So you offset and completely eliminate the need to maintain the standby power plants that are used for a short duration, as Ishan pointed out. So that's what the enabling platform is and the technology is. And everything on top of it is basically driven by the use cases and the market context. It's slightly different for what will work in India. But the capabilities are by and large the same, right? So you want to take the smart meter data, you want to run some analytics, and you want to use industry standard methodologies to prove out to your stakeholders that whatever you're measuring and whatever you're compensating your customers is transparent, clear, and is acceptable by the industry. So what we did in Delhi was a quick glimpse of that, right? So first of all, there's some key facts which we've also written in the report, but specifically about the pilot and the work that we did. We targeted about 4,000 customers in Tata Power footprint. This was for last year, and we roughly had about half of those customers sign up with us in the program. So roughly 2,000 customers. This year, we actually expanded the program, and right now we have about 12,000 customers who participated already in our first event last week. So there is, it's a telling sign there's a lot of interest in the market. Customers are excited to be part of these programs. We also did surveys with these customers to understand what were the motivation factors. And the main things were actually socioeconomic, actually. Incentives only played a small role, while they did play a role. But what really mattered to most of the participants were the fact that they were part of a greater good and a mission that helped reduce carbon emissions by actually actively doing something about it. It's one thing to change something and do and feel good about it passively. It's another thing when actually you do something and the results are there the next day, and you're able to see the impacts of what you were able to, your contributions to the overall the system. So this is actually piggybacking on some of the experience that we are and success that we are seeing in other markets. So case in point, in Hong Kong, we have one of our customers who last year ran a program for about 300,000 customers, or 3 lakh customers. This year, they've scaled their program to over 1 million customers, right? And next year, they intend to have about 2.5 million customers. The rate at which these programs are scaling is unprecedented. So it's not easy for utilities to come up with a solution that could actually meet these kind of requirements and scalability needs. Hence, you have these technologies like what AutoGrid provides that becomes the enabling tools for these things to scale. So quickly, at the highest level, we targeted about 60 events in this program. And the cumulative shed over the duration of all of these events is about 18 megawatt hours. And we were able to, as I said, recruit about 2,000 plus customers. And this, by 2024, our goal is to actually recruit about 100,000 customers in Delhi alone. Faster if we're able to accelerate some of the smart metering deployments. And some interesting findings in our results, which we will discuss, but the program structure and the success and failure of these programs are largely dependent on how you engage with your customers, how exactly are you incentivizing them, and also are you transparent exactly what happens when and what actions they're supposed to do when you do call them for a demand response event. So to that end, it was actually quite a big eye-opener and learning experience for the entire team at Tata Power to implement the programs, get feedback, and actually experience what customers feel like when they participate in these programs. And we have even some success stories with customers who had 3 air conditioners in the house. They end up turning off 2, and they actually had a great family time in one room. They still were able to run 1 air conditioner, but they were able to offset two other 2 air conditioners in the house. So which is actually quite a really good story. And the driver for them was really like not even the incentive. It was really the fact that they could create a impact on the overall the emission factors in the grid. So some interesting factors that we saw was that there was variability in terms of the participation rates. But by and large, we were seeing an average participation of about 50% of the enrolled customer base. So if you statistically model this right, you can extrapolate this data, and if you can at least get in a city like Delhi, have 200 megawatts or 150 megawatts worth of demand response just on the flexible side, right? And that would require us to have a Delhi-wide program with BSES and others as such. But generally speaking, we could design programs that would allow us to capture at least 50% or more in the performance. An interesting thing that we did also was based on the flash rewards and announcements and in the notification that were sent out saying that, hey, if you do it today, you will win an air conditioner. the participation rate went up significantly higher. Even though we did not pay these customers more money or anything different, we just by the nature of the messages that we were able to send and incentivize, uh, we saw a higher participation rate. That's what you see highlighted here is an example of an event where we did the flash announcement and we saw that uh, there was a significant jump in the participation rate. Um, so those were some of the key things. I think we did discuss very at a broad stroke here in our report. This is another view of that, of how you want to start with behavioral DR and work your way towards other type of tools towards automated DR, as well as including commercial industrial loads and also electric vehicles and other type of DERs. But we can definitely start slow with what's happening in India and work our way. And this is a journey that most utilities globally have taken. And it really we feel like India can actually leapfrog and take advantage of some of the deployments that we're doing today on the AMI side and the smart metering and recapture some of the value through demand response and time of use rates. So with that, I'd like to see if you have and turn it back over to the team there and take questions.
Thank you so much, Vish. That was indeed a very interesting presentation. I'll just open it for questions, just a couple of minutes. Any direct questions for Vish right now? If not, we are going to be having an entire Q&A round after the panel discussion. You can also make a note and come up with them later. But any questions immediately? Please.
Vish, this is Satish. Hi Vish, this is Satish. So one question is that you talked about 18 megawatt of shed load. What was like an average of 0.5 kilowatt per customer? What was the incentive that was being given per customer? Because you did mention that that's a very critical component of any program design. So if you can maybe shed, and if was there anything related to sensitivity analysis that you guys were able to do in terms of the participation rate versus the amount of incentive that is on offer?
Yeah, actually, that is something that we are going to experiment in this year's program, to tell you the truth, because the sample size was such a small sample size that it would not be statistically significant for us to try out the sensitivity analysis. Having said that, we did, I think in this program construct, we paid per event. And some customers gave more than the others. We have participants who've given about 4 or 5 kilowatts, and there are also customers who've given much, much less. The one thing that we did in terms of the program structure was we eliminated a certain class of customers who did not meet the threshold for at least delivering 10% of shed. So we only incentivized those pool of customers who actually deliver at least measured a shed of at least 10% or more. So this allowed a lot of the underperforming accounts to be weeded out of the incentive structure. That's thereby increasing the cost effectiveness. So from the event itself, I think the incentive structures were about $200 200 rupees per event, which we feel it is substantially higher. And with the proper design and if we can shift to more gamified approach where we give air conditioners and other tablets and phones, so you're incentivizing less number of people, but you're giving them bigger gifts. I think that's the construct that we are going to experiment this year.
Yeah, can I just add something here? See, I think because it was the first of its kind, I would agree that incentives were a little on the higher side. But ultimately, it depends how many events you're able to do. So in that study that was referred to by NREL USAID in Delhi, customers asking them their willingness to shed load. So people, about 50% people said that for 250 rupees a month, they'd be willing to shed load, including air conditioning load. So I think it's part of the overall design of the program. If you have regular events and the customer has chance to participate maybe in 4 or 5 events in a month, which is, I think, typically what you do overseas. And there is a gamification in terms of rewards, etc. The average cost could be, maybe between 50 and 100 rupees kind of a thing. That's what we feel.
Yeah. Yeah, and even in advanced economies where we've seen, we've like even utilities are paying much less, like even in Hong Kong and other markets, right? So we have the data, and we are going to apply some of those learnings in the Indian context.
Yeah, so in the Hong Kong case, for example, because program is so large, you mentioned about 300,000 going to 1 million customers. They actually have a website, and it looks like a credit card reward program. So there are multiple options, and you accumulate points and redeem points. So if you really do at scale, the cost can come down significantly, is what we feel.
Yeah.
We have another question from the audience. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, hi, good morning to all of you. My question is to the Vish. I am Dr. Meenu Mishra. I am from BSES Yamuna Power Limited. And I want to congratulate you for this conducting this DR event, because this is the prime requirement for managing our peak load. Especially being from a DISCOM community, I can understand how important it is. So I would like to add that, like, we have also tried this DR, which we call is an auto DR. Basically, you have mentioned it's a behavioral base. So what we have done, we have tried to regulate it through WhatsApp. And it was funded by a Shakti Foundation, and we have done it along with the ICF International. So in that also, I just want to add on this, because this is a prime requirement for the utilities, and it's very cost effective also, because we have regulated through WhatsApp group only, and we have given the tips to them, and it was mainly for the HT consumer. And that Delhi Jal Board, Mother Dairy, all these residentials, even the hospitals have participated in this. And we also managed to get 17 megawatts sharing in 10 to 12 events. And some of the events got failed also, because suddenly it started raining, and because if you do the manual one, then these are the challenges for that also. So it's a very good initiative, and how the concern is that how we can enhance or to other DISCOM also. This is the real challenge, especially with the challenges we are having with this DR resources also, like we have to manage the renewable. So this is I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for Vish, or can we move on to the next segment, because we'll have another Q&A round there also. All right. Well, I'm going to thank all of you for your presence here for the first session. So this was the inaugural session. I'm going to request Dr. Satish to please felicitate all our panelists who joined us for this session. Can we have a big round of applause for all the panelists? So we're presenting all the panelists with a book that is called First Fuel, India's Energy Efficiency Journey and a Radical Vision for Sustainability. So the book First Fuel is an informally told story of the energy efficiency journey that India undertook from the mid-60s through the first oil crisis of 1973 till present day. And this book has been authored by Mr. Padu Padmanabhan, who is also one of our founding members. So for any one of you who's not read it, please get your hands onto the book, and it's definitely one great read. So thank you very much to each of our panelists here. I'm going to request Dr. Satish and Mr. Arvind to please stay back on the dais, as you will be entering into the panel discussion now. And my sincere thanks to the remaining panelists. Thank you so much. I'll just give my team a couple of minutes to rearrange the stage for the next session. I don't have his intro. Can I ask him to introduce himself? Same here, same person. He's here. Okay. I shall. Thank you, everyone. Moving forward, we enter our panel discussion now. So we are going to have a panel debate about different topics for the next 30 minutes. And at the end of these 30 minutes, we'll open up the stage for everyone to have a two-way conversation and ask questions. I think we are at an advantage today. We are a very small group of people, so let's try to make it as informal as possible. Feel free to jump in wherever you can add, ask more questions, complicate the situation, or give us a solution, however it may be. I'm going to invite a few additional people whom we have on the panel alongside our members from the previous session. So firstly, it's my privilege to be inviting Mr. Siddharth Arora. He is currently working as the Associate Director in the Clean Power team of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. He holds 11 years of rich experience in the domain of renewable energy, energy transition, electricity regulations, and sustainable development. He's worked with critical regulators like Maharashtra Electricity Regulatory Commission and the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. Please join us on stage, Siddharth. A big round of applause for him, everyone. Thank you so much. Next, I invite Mr. Vikas Gaba, who is the partner and national head, Power and Utilities at KPMG in India. He has about 18 years of work experience managing complex and large-scale power sector transformation projects across South Asia. His area of expertise includes policy, regulation, institutional strengthening, private sector participation, tariff setting, governance strengthening, structural and market reforms, turnaround plans, and implementation hand-holding. It's an honor to have you amongst us, Mr. Gaba. Please join us. We are also expecting Mr. Abhishek Ranjan to join us. I think we are trying to have him join us virtually for the event, but I'm not going to hold the panel. Dr. Satish will be moderating this session. I'm going to hand it over to him, and we'll allow Mr. Abhishek Ranjan to step in as and when the AV has been sorted at his front. So over to you, Dr. Satish.
So thank you, Afsha, and a very warm welcome to all the panelists on the dais. It's an absolute privilege and an honor to be moderating this panel, and I'm sure that we'll have some fun hearing the perspectives of so many experts and people very knowledgeable in their domains. So we have heard two very good presentation setting the context. One is a little bit of a road mapping exercise in terms of what can be done, how can we start, what are some enabling legislations, regulations that are already in place, what are some of the market actions that are happening in response to some of the emergency events, or I think in terms of our long-term decarbonization goals. And within that context, how can this whole demand flexibility and demand response can play an important role. And then the presentation that Vish made is a very, I think, important and relevant presentation, that how I think today's technology can actually do a lot of legwork in terms of demonstrating that what is the value of demand response for utilities. And I think in the context of especially managing the peak demand, I heard some numbers that, I mean, one of the challenges is that the peak happens for a very short period of time. I don't know what the right number is, maybe like 3 to 5%, or depending on what we are defining as peak. But the amount of investment that we have to make, I think, into the entire grid infrastructure is several times, I think, what we are really talking about in terms of the percentage of time. So I think it's a complex topic. It's a multidimensional topic. It's a multi-stakeholder topic. And we know that I think we are barely starting to scratch, I think, the surface on how to mainstream or how to institutionalize this particular topic. So maybe perhaps what I'll do, that I'll have probably one direct questions to all of you, and then I have some open questions that I can put. But feel free to, I think, you all have a lot of experience, so if you want to put your perspective forward, then don't get tied down, I think, by my question. Absolutely, I think we are trying to keep it informal and trying to get as much perspectives as much possible, which will allow, I think, all the stakeholders to start to move forward on this important initiative. So maybe I'll again start with Mr. Bali. We heard that the importance of, I think you also talked about the importance of smart meters. And we know that smart meters is something that has grabbed the headlines. I think it is getting rolled out pan-India. And you also mentioned that some of these smart metering tenders are have a built-in component to support DR programs as well. So I think the question that I have is that can smart metering programs strengthen the business case for demand response for the utilities and also vice versa? And do you feel that demand response and smart metering adoption can go hand in hand? So over to you, Mr. Bali.
Thank you, Satish. And I think you touched the basic point at this moment. Since we have been rolling out this smart metering program, and that has already enabling network is being set up. And I was just going through the earlier presentation, and even was Chandana just explained through that in the report also. And going by the measures we are taking and going by the present situation context and the RE penetration and everything coming on to platter. In that regard, if we have smart metering system and that too on a scale which we are having, I think it will not be in one go, but that will be in phases coming out, and some utility which are already taken something, which have gone ahead, like some advanced utility and which are having already something, particularly RE and other thing. I will take certain, I think the enabling factors which is driving that. One is, I think this is RE, of course we all know that is happening that way. And we have EV charging infrastructure also coming into being. And of course the peak. And what we look forward to other thing is the AC load which are going to have it, which are going to impact in our, I think, situation and more so in the northern belt. So that is going to affect, and that provides, I think, major arena. And when we have this smart metering, other thing, network available and data available, and of course the provision available, we have the connect, disconnect and everything on that. Load control facilities also there. And if we are able to sensitize the consumers, I think that will pave the way further. And going by thing even further, we have taken, I think we have done certain workshop in this year beginning also. That is about the net zero buildings also. That will also be a key area. Because I think ECBC code is already there, some energy efficient buildings are coming. Of course, that will be more concentrated in the urban areas. And that can definitely provide some arena to start with. And I was going to the, Dr. Mishra was mentioning, one is the manual thing after sensitizing and after putting a consumer on, I think, basically on the same platform, and then taking further into auto mode. That is where the grid role and everything, grid operator roles and the aggregator role, then where this software being supplied by this auto grid and everything like that, that will be facilitating that. In that, I think the entire the cost benefit analysis and empowering the consumer, that will really along with this smart metering, because one thing first and then other thing, that will not happen. And it will happen in one big bang approach. Slowly it has to come through. Let's say the advanced utilities which have taken some baby steps already, then they have to be matured and taken further. And I think that will take us further. And provisions are already there, as I mentioned in my earlier opening remarks, that in 2003 also that has been provision. You can provide that TOU tariffs and other things to start with. And that will slowly shift the demand, and of course shaping up and then shedding also we are doing that. But if we have the demand response available through that, through the aggregators, and that will also build up components and benefiting and incentivizing. So I think that will provision, and we have already started with that. But of course it would not happen in one go. Slowly it has to happen. Provisions are there. That is what we are targeting. Some advanced utility to take on board, and then we have to create an environment. Then we have to do certain workshop, then we have to engage them, and maybe some pilots on such tangible basis, not intangible, something we are getting into that. And then I think that will take us further. I think there is really much scope into that. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Bali. You touched upon quite a few points, and the point that you are making, that while smart meter is going to play a pretty important role, but we really need to look at the entire ecosystem of like where I think the next generation of demand going to come? What is the current, I think, where is the current demand that is contributing to peak load? What kind of buildings are going to get designed? I think this idea, I think what, again, AutoGrid is doing in terms of identification of the critical loads and enabling it and allowing utilities to control some of these loads, I think these are all, as you are saying, going to move, I think, in parallel. So maybe I think, Arvind, I will just come to the related thing that Mr. Bali mentioned. Cooling is, I think, on the top of everyone's agenda. And you have ran utilities and you have seen, I think, what the load profile at the time of peak looks like. And AEEE also, I think, cooling is an area where we work extensively. I mean, we have India Cooling Action Plan, and we are also looking at that, what are the key appliances which are really driving the peak demand in India. And in that context, we feel that fan is, of course, providing a lot of the baseline load, because, I mean, everybody has a fan, even the poor people. So what can be done, I think, at the fan level, because there are technologies that are there which can really cut down the load of fans, I think, by 50%. And then also, I think, on the air conditioning side, which is the penetration is like really less than 10% in Indian homes right now. And I think if that is being forecast to increase to say like 40 to 50% in the next 2 decades, how are the utilities going to, I think, address this challenge from this cooling load? And I think you can also, if you want, talk about the EV penetration. That is also the second big category of load that we are thinking about. So, another piece that I would say, that in terms of these smart meters, smart appliances, one of the things that we have been arguing, that can, like a smart meter functionality, be embedded in the like air conditioner itself. So not only does it give feedback in terms of instantaneous power consumption, but it also tells the consumer that how much is the cooling that this equipment is doing, because we have variable frequency drive control these things. So whether it is consuming 500 watt or whether it is consuming 1500 watt, because it can change from, I think, that. And I think how utilities are actually going to take advantage of, I think, some of these intelligence that is coming into some of these smart appliances. So would really love to hear your thoughts on this.
I think, as you very rightly said, the load growth in India is driven by two very important factors. I think cooling load is certainly one of them, and EV charging in this projected load that we have till 2030, I think both have a very significant weightage in the load growth. So I think one very clear reflection of this growth is in terms of, if we see, for example, in Delhi, over the last decade, 2011 to 2020, if you look at the load growth, the peak load grew by about 57%, whereas the average sales grew by 29%. So what is happening is that because of penetration of these kind of appliances, the load is getting more and more peaky, whereas the average sale is not growing at the same pace. And for a utility, the implication is that you're creating more and more capex, which goes on into the tariff, but you're not getting commensurate return for that capex, because you will not get proportionate number of units that you sell. So in a way, it puts burden on the tariff, and you're creating more and more capacity. So one more way of looking at it is, if you look at the load curve for Delhi, and I'm quoting figures of one of the Delhi discoms, 2% of the load comes for 0.05% of the time. So if Delhi has a peak load of 7,500 megawatt, that means 150 megawatt clocks in for only 4 hours in a year. You're creating capacity of 150 megawatts, which will be serviced for only 4 hours. And if you take the cost of creating capex for load growth at 3 to 4 crores per megawatt from LT till EHV 3366 kV network, that means there is an expenditure of 5 to 600 crores for just those 4 hours. And this is something easily handled through a program like demand response. 4 hours is not a very large amount of time in a year. And I think that is the kind of opportunity. And as Mr. Bali very rightly mentioned, today we've been talking about DR and Delhi distribution companies for the last 10 years, but it never worked out because the basic enablers are not in place. Today you have smart meters, and I think the data, and more importantly from a customer's point of view, you can have a measurement and verification system which he understands. So end of the day, the customer is a central piece of the program. he must participate voluntarily, looking at his benefits. So you need to be able to show a customer that if he participates, there is an immediate feedback to him which tells him that yes, you are qualified and this is the incentive you earned. So that entire process of being able to do the M&V quickly within a few hours and get back to customer by the end of the day for a program that you did today, an event, I think that is the success of the program. If you come back to the customer after a month, you would have lost interest. So I think that is really the point that Mr. Bali made, that today you have the basic enabler, which is the smart meter. What were the other points?
Yeah, I think you covered it. I think I was just alluding to like the EV and the cooling as the drivers.
Right. So yeah, so I think on cooling, I mean there are various ways in which one can try and mitigate the impact of cooling. So there is energy efficiency, which is more star-rated kind of appliances, 5-star rated ACs. That's one way of looking at the cooling load. Then there are technologies which allow you to shift the load, which is like chilling plants. You can chill the water and then run the air handling units later on. But I think the real opportunity for us is this demand response kind of because there is no capex required. The meters are in place. We only need to enroll customers, educate customers, and create a program which will sustain. The other point I think which you referred to and also Mr. Bali referred to is how to take it forward, right? So in US, demand responses are driven, programs are driven by a regulatory mandate. There is a mandate for them to do these programs. In India, because there is, we have sensitivity around the tariffs, and many utilities don't really have the tariff which cover their costs. So for them to take on a burden of a program which does not pay for itself, they don't have the ability. So I think what we're trying to do through the TPDDL exercise is to do a program at enough scale where you can capture the entire value stack. So there is capex deferral, there is managing your peak purchase prices, there is DSM penalties. We want to be able to capture the entire value stack. And I think only if you do all of this, we'll be able to make a business case where you can go to the regulator and say, sir, this is a program which will not impact the tariff adversely, good for the customer, good for the tariff, and good for the utility. I think that is what we are hoping to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Arvind, for very, very, I think, insightful comments in terms of not only, I think, what we need to do, but all the value streams that we need to bring to the table for, I think, regulators and distribution companies to really start to truly appreciate the value of demand response. Because you have been working with distribution companies for a very long time. And I think in terms of some of the challenges, I mean, we have talked about some of the challenges and barriers that distribution company face. And of course, Arvind also alluded to some of those things in terms of how to incentivize, how to make it revenue neutral, or maybe I think you have programs that pay for itself, I think on top of making them revenue neutral. So under the current tariff regime and how the tariff gets set by the regulators, the question is that the regulations governing the operational and planning practices of DISCOMs, do you believe that there is an opportunity to recognize demand as a resource? And is the timing right? I mean, we are talking about that. And do we need to think of regulatory changes such as performance-based regulations, which kind of expands, I think, the sandbox a little bit for, and not just expand, but also does a little bit of a forcing mechanism that you need to think a little bit broadly to, I think, deliver electricity in the most reliable, cost-optimal manner, while also bringing down the carbon impact of the grid.
Right. Thank you, Satish. So I have been fortunate to be involved in 2-3 studies that have happened earlier, long time back. First with Shakti, then Bhaskar, you would remember with PSD, we had started something on DR, and more recently with the ESL, where we have been having very deep discussions with the Delhi DISCOMs also. So I think covering the challenges part, the synthesis that come out of this, and 5-7 learnings that come out of the experience that I have had, at least, I think first a structured approach is essential. We have had, this report itself covers about experience of 7-8 pilots. I think now a standard prescription, not saving, same events, that will have to be customized, but the structural construct has to be standardized if we are looking at bringing a large public market into the play. We are talking only about 4, 5 or 2, 3 private discoms as of now. If we have to bring that, I think that will be important, which includes infra required, customer, tariff changes, cost benefit model, MRV. I think that a kind of a ready deployment kit has to be ready to be for discoms to follow. If we go piece by piece with all discoms, I think we'll take enormous amount of time. So credibility, scale, pace, all will come if we have this. Second, whether it is behavioral DR or automated DR, technology and timely information is critical. Arvind just mentioned, one of my colleagues participated in the event that happened on Sunday, 2-3 days back. And this was not on at the end of the day, instantly a message came in that 100 rupees are credited to your account. So there is a stimulus. And these stimulus are needed. Vish mentioned about incentives. There is need for incentives, there is need for gamification, and there is need for constant engagement even during non-event hours. A loyal customer who's been participating event after event, even how do we engage even during non-event hours? I can't make him dynamic or keep offering rewards and during only the event hours. So how do we do that? Third, I think a very important point when we look at international market, full-scale DR in a bankable manner works only in conjunction with other grid resources. The operator has other grid resources at his disposal. So tomorrow, behavioral DR, yes, every DR is not auto DR. Behavioral has its own nuances, but let's face it, it's not bankable. Tomorrow, if I have to commit, we are still dependent on consumer behavior. We can reasonably predict that 40, 47, 50% will respond. But if I have other resources also at disposal, I can create a bankable scale of it. So that points becomes very important. Fourth, I think plan has to start with consumer and not other way around. Here I have 2 points. One, let's look at consumer set. Residential, we have already talked about ACs being a fantastic example. I'm not going into detail. I think there we have experience. Second is commercial, where confidence building still is required. Cooling load is a clear candidate, but depends on customer type, nature of customer. I think there we need some more confidence building. Let me give you example of surveys we did. We visited about 7-8 industry types in Tirupur district in Udumalpet region in Tamil Nadu a few years back, and this is a heavy wind belt, and they had to balance intraday wind fluctuations are of the order of 1,000 to 1,500 megawatts, and Kadamprarai, which is 250, was the only balancing resource. So the idea was to study what DR can offer. On a scale of 250 megawatt, about 10 to 12% was something that we came out. And how, when we went into different classes and type of industries, they have to be studied. And one philosophy that pretty much works across industries, look at the processes in the industry, what are differential speeds and connected load of that processes in the industry, and see where I can halt, where I can create storage. Let me give you an example. Tea industry. We pick up leaves, there is withering where leaves are processed, there is CTC machine. Then fermenting of leaves happen, then drying of leaves, and then grading, packaging of tea happens. Now we studied the processing rate of each of this process. What is the processing rate in kg per hour and the connected load of each of this process? Very doable. Now CTC is the slowest process. Now if we build storage before or after, you can halt the other processes which run faster. The processes that run faster, and an event can be coined or designed around that. So that is one point. The second point on customer is, I think it requires deep behavior understanding of customers, whether it is incentive, gamification, as I said, stimulus, even during non-event hours. Smart meter permits this, and Mr. Bali, I think, touched upon that. The cost benefit tool that NSGM has developed now also has feature of peak load management and DR. What is the benefit of smart meter with respect to that? 2 last points. I think you mentioned about tariff. Dynamic tariff pricing programs is a construct we must discuss and take it to FOR level. Because if we go piece by piece with every state, as I made the point earlier, I think it will become very difficult and a very cumbersome process. How this can be enabled across the board, because today now we will have smart meter and they are on the horizon in couple of years. And last is creating more reference cases with the public discoms. The smart metering infrastructure provides that to us. Satish.
Thank you, Vikas. I think you covered a pretty wide gamut of things that need to be done. But I think all of these things, what we are hearing from our esteemed panelists, is pointing to the fact that I think the timing seems to be right. There is a lot of infrastructure, I think some policy and regulatory frameworks, the technological elements, I think that we have already seen and which are readily available. And what I'm also hearing that there are, I think, what is really working and I think what we need to do more of. So the point that is being made both through the pilot that AutoGrid did and what you are making, what you just alluded to, is this timely feedback. And we do believe that this piece needs to be done in a manner where I think the settlement happens almost instantaneously, or at least I think on the same day. And I will just narrate an anecdote. I was talking to Mr. Sanjeev Kumar. He has been the MSEDCL chairman, and he was saying that they used to get a lot of questions, I think, in terms of the trading and I think how these settlements are happening at the regulatory level. So he said, look, what we are going to do, we are just going to put everything on website, and this has to be done for every day. And he said all the questions stopped immediately, because once I think that transparency was brought in, I think, and it's the same thing that the customer need. I mean, they don't want that we will get paid at the end of like month in our bill where they can't decipher, I think, how. So this is, I think, a very, very important. And the other thing that you have also mentioned, I think, is some of the other, that DR needs to go hand in hand with many other aspects. I think whether we are looking at building energy code or net zero energy building design, grid interactive buildings, or I think the other EVs and I think other sources. So that also, I think, and again, we do have these things at our disposal, but how to compile it, I think, in a holistic program. So I know that I think Abhishek is also here. So Abhishek, I'll come to you. But before that, I do want to go to Siddharth. And Siddharth, Shakti's mandate is, I think, to enable energy transition. And to, I think, in order to do that, we view that energy efficiency, renewable energy, I think, the two sides of the same coin. And in terms of the work that Shakti is involved in supporting, and you have a long history of, I think, working in the power sector, how do you think that some of the mandates that our Prime Minister has made, I think in terms of this, I think we talked about the net zero commitment and the 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel commitment, and how do you think that is going to play out together with, I think, what we are talking about right now? So maybe I think that's my question. If from your experience, you can talk about that, how important it is for India to acknowledge demand as a resource, and are we ready to embrace the significant value proposition in acknowledging that flexible demand resource for grid reliability needs to go hand in hand with our renewable energy commitment as well? So over to you.
Thank you, Satish. So on the point of net zero and the commitments made at COP26, it is something not related to this subject, but yes, at Shakti we have commissioned one work with MNRE on the modeling exercise of how this 500 gigawatt will be achieved. So it is more on which all technologies, what will be the trajectory, which all regions, land requirement, where exactly this 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel energy sources will be coming up. And at Shakti, as you said, our key motive is to have the energy transition. And what I firmly believe is that the variability of the renewables can meet with the flexibility in the demand, and which is what this particular demand response program is about. And in past also, we have supported various programs on the demand response. Currently, the existing Tata Power project, which we have done, basically it was phase 1, where about 2,000 consumers participated. Now there are deliberations within the board and with the higher management here. We want to support the phase 2 also, where Tata Power wants to have 10,000 or more consumers. And if I talk about numbers, as Vish has already presented, that about 18 megawatt hours of savings and about 8 megawatt of load was shed in the 16 events. So one number which came to my mind is the saving on that particular avoidance, or you'll say the load which was saved, was about 6.8 rupees per unit. This is the avoidance of the peak demand, peak power procurement basically. Now this does not include the other savings on your upgradation of the distribution network or on the transmission network. So these are still to be evaluated, and like some numbers which have been there in circulation within the team. But yes, there was a saving of about 6.8. It's huge, I would say. Partly because of the events were conducted in October, November time last year, when there was the coal shortage was going on, and the demand in the exchange was quite high. I mean, the prices were high. And other point is like one very small saving component which I think has been missed so far is on the RPO obligation, on the RPO target. So when you are reducing your total demand by demand response program or behavior program, so your actual procurement comes down, and accordingly the RPO targets which DISCOM needs to meet comes down. So there is saving on if you have to procure REC at the end of, say, financial year, usually what DISCOMs are doing. So there is saving on that also. So overall, a lot of areas, lot of avenues on which you can build on your program, and that's where now on the second phase we are very keen on working. And once we have something substantial, because with 2,000 consumers we cannot go to a regulator and say, okay, this is what we have done. Now we want to have a firm up. We want to bring in change within the consumer also, as rightly pointed out by Vish, when there was an instant message, so there was a spike in the number of consumer which participated. And also what I was told by Tata Power was that one of the parameter was they have actually written letters to the consumer with their name and all the specifications, and thanking them and asking them to participate. So there was a sense of recognition with the consumers, and that's how they were more able to give up their efforts in the behavioral program. And with the phase 2, we are basically trying to optimize the incentive, because you cannot like till eternity run the incentive scheme. So in the morning, I think you asked about what was the amount given. So what I roughly remember that for participation it was 200 rupees. So about 4,000, and enrollment was for 200 rupees, and for each event participation it was about 250 rupees. But there was something like which we want to do in phase 2 is that, so the consumers which participated and they were, say, able to shed load of say 20%, they were also given the same amount equivalent to what 11% was shed by the same other consumer. So in the phase 2 we want to optimize that component of incentives, and let's see how it will go. And I firmly believe once we have numbers from phase 2 also, we'll definitely approach the regulator and asking them to bring in some amendments or some kind of new regulations in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth, and also for, I think, shedding some more light into this very interesting and could be a very high impact program in terms of convincing the regulators and distributor to do more. And maybe I think this will have some spillover effects to public sector discoms. A lot of us are talking about that we need to go beyond private sector discoms, and I think start having these conversations with public sector discoms. That's when I think the full potential at the country level can be realized.
There I want to highlight another work which we are doing with the UP discom in Lucknow, which is more on time of use tariff. Kind of behavioral demand response. Again, in the sandbox approach, we have blessing from the regulator. UPPCL is on board, and we are doing this work with a public utility also.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. So, Abhishek, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Abhishek. So, good afternoon, and thanks for at least making the time to join us virtually. We would have liked you to be in person here. So, Abhishek, you have been hearing about, I think, some of the discussions, I think, very, very important, insightful, I think, comments that is being shared by all the panelists. You have yourself been part of many of these DR programs, and so one of the questions, I think, a couple of quick questions. So one is that how do you see the RPO obligations on utilities? I think they are increasing and based on regulatory directives. And given that the RE have must run kind of a status, how are utilities kind of going to be dealing with the intermittency and unevenness of the supply side? And the second piece that I just want, because it has come into discussions, is that how do you think that the measurement and verification, I think this is an area, because I have worked on IPMVP developed, and we worked on the US, the DR program for measurement and verification for California utilities. This is like 20 years ago. And so how do you see that, how do you strike a balance between rigor and simplicity, so that I think the right message is getting on past, and I think you are doing it in a manner where I think transparently you are showing that the customers who are participating, who are doing more, as I think Siddharth also mentioned, they are getting rewarded in a proportional basis. So maybe I think some quick thoughts from you over the next 2-3 minutes, and then we will open up the questions. We will open up the panel for some questions from the audience as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Satish, and apologies for not being able to make it there. Interestingly, we are having a very similar discussions over here organized by Ministry of Power, Government of India. It's a strategy workshop on power markets. And the two questions that you have asked, in fact, they were discussed just a while ago. And I'll deliberate on what is going on in the thoughts of the policy makers right now. In terms of your question was about the RE integration, how the discoms manage the variability and intermittency of the renewable energy, both on the front of the technology as well as maybe on the business side or the contract structuring side. Now, one is obviously we are talking about the real-time markets and similar other markets, including Samast being implemented for the 5-minute market. Right now, RTM is an hour ahead market. So more close you get to the delivery and you have the gate closure of the market, better will be the, a response to the inaccuracy factor or the forecasting MAPE of the RE. The basic problem in integrating RE is the inaccuracy in forecasting the RE generation, or high level, in other words, high level of forecasting MAPE, day ahead and intraday as well. So that is one thing being structured. So that is on the market side. So where the balancing can be done by the the discoms using the market mechanism. Now, second thing is the RE generators for the IPPs themselves have to work a lot on improving the forecasting accuracy. Now, the forecasting accuracy improvement has two paradigms. One is technology improvement, having more and more robust technology to track and forecast RE generation. Second is use the available diversity in RE generation profile, because in India, for example, you have multiple states, multiple geographies where the RE profiles are many ways complementary. Now, there is a one grid, one network, one tariff framework already in our country. multiple point injection of the RE from different states will also ensure and give a leeway to the RE IPP to balance out the RE, give a firm, stable profile as per the declared schedule, banking upon the complementary nature of the RE profiles across. Okay, so suppose he has wind farms across Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and he has committed certain megawatt to a state like Punjab. Now, if suppose the wind, there is a drop in generation in Gujarat, at the same time, Tamil Nadu may not drop. So these kind of, if you club them together and create a load following RTC profile using RE, so that proves you benefit for both the peak management as well as off-peak management as well as shortage and surplus management also. The second thing is, why don't you give certainty in terms of variability from the declared capacity on a day-ahead basis to the intraday within, say, right now, DSM regulations say up to 10% that is allowed. Now, earlier it was 15%. Beyond that, you have to pay the DSM penalties. Obviously, that can also be managed. This 10% can also be brought down using complementarity. That is number one in the RE generation profile. Second is the complementary demand profile of the different states. So when you design certain products, so you keep in mind two different states having complementary demand profile. So complementary RE generation profile and complementary demand profile of the state taken together, and you have a more flexible yet firm load following RE. And of course, markets are anyway there to play the role. This was the answer to your first one regarding the variability. But then the second thing is, in the hands of the utilities, the demand side management and institution building at the level of DSO, that is also being discussed over here. So the DSO or distribution system operator concept needs to be implemented and implemented fast. Though it has been given a place in the draft NEP last year, but it needs to be implemented fast. That is being deliberated. And probably once it comes into play, the aggregator role of different players, not the trader, but the aggregator. And that is going to help a lot in mitigating the variability in the demand or variability in the distributed energy resources at the root itself. So when that plays out, so the demand response becomes a top order dispatchable resource. And the concepts, as we have been discussing in this workshop, or previously also we have been doing so many sandbox based experiments, that becomes real. More so in the recent since October last year, the spikes in the energy markets, the power exchanges today in our country, they are energy markets. You see the energy market price spikes, and that is happening for the want of capacity in the whole power network. And that is what it went off. And we discussed also, like, for example, Texas, we had seen similar situations last year because of lack of capacity and single part tariff energy market. So that needs to change. So similarly, why can't these DSOs and the DRs be brought into the place? And second is, why can't the renewable energy itself, the wholesale renewable energy, can be now transitioned, whether it is good time or not, that can be debated, to a two-part tariff regime. And that will take care of must-run status, surplus, curtailment, etc., etc. So that is something called mainstreaming, which is being debated right now, and possibly it will become very true and very soon. And that's what the case is. Dr. Satish, over to you. Sorry if I missed something, you can ask me, please.
No, thanks, Abhishek. I'm also keeping an eye on the time that we have. I think we are on the hour, but I'll just maybe open the session for any questions from the audience, which have been patiently listening to the deliberations that we are having. So any questions, keep it short. I think if you want to engage, I think in a more detailed discussion, we can do it over lunch. But any quick questions or short remarks or anything from the audience, I'll request people to introduce themselves and then say. Marcus, we have a mic.
Yeah, thank you. Marcus Wiep from GIZ. Yeah, we have spoken mainly about the behavioral aspect and the, let's say, large demand response activities, but how about the industrial demand response capabilities here in India? Is it possible that we have a few mentioning of that as well?
Okay, so Vikas and then Vish, yeah.
Okay. So industrial, I think when I was discussing the Tamil Nadu case, I gave the example, the zone that where we were surveying, there were industries related to paper, to textile, to tea industries, and so on and so forth. So we went on to study the processes of all of those industries, and there was potential in those industries. So total load surveyed was roughly around 250 megawatts, and the potential of DR was roughly around 8 to 10% that appeared to be so. Of course, with some modifications, investments that had to be made there. It was not on voluntary basis at that time. This was just a survey. So there is definitely a potential that exists there. Maybe Vish, you can come in.
Vish, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So generally speaking, we looked at both residential and commercial DR in India. And first, let me paint the picture globally. Globally, actually, a lot of DR exists in industrial and commercial buildings. Commercial buildings more so because the replication potential is extremely high, and when you go from one building to another building. But when you go from an industry to industry, it is very process oriented, very custom to the business process. So it's a little bit more harder to achieve the objective, but a lot more load is definitely there. Uh, and that's true of typically everywhere, like globally as we see. In India, when we looked at it, one of the systemic problem and the design problem was about how cross subsidies work, and whether utilities were amenable to actually losing revenue from higher paying customers, especially when the price differential wasn't really high. The producing the goods for them was actually more important. So based on the rate structure design, we felt that it was more effective to actually go after the residential demand response load. Although it's very different, counterintuitive to what you see across the globe, where you have a lot more CNI load and a lot less residential load.
Abhishek, you want to come in?
Yeah, just want to come in over here. We have been looking at this industrial demand response from the lens of assuming that the industries, they are high paying as per the skewed or the cross subsidized retail rate slab that we have. B, they cannot shut down their processes or shift their demand due to their inherent nature of the assembly line or the processes that they have. Both are true. But given these two scenarios also, and given the scenario that they are high paying consumers for the discoms, even though they can be pushed towards demand response, meaning that the demand of these industries may not be fulfilled from the grid. They may fulfill it from their own captive sources or from other sources other than discoms for that particular time period. Now, this can be suitably designed through incentivization and the structuring of the contract. For example, recent days, when the wholesale market prices, when the power exchange went off, say about 12 rupees or even 20 rupees before the capping was put into place in India since October last year. And still today, it has been hovering on the MCV maximum cleared price. MCV is about maximum is 10 rupees or even capped at 12 rupees now. Now, this is more than the slab rate of the industrial consumer. Now, it makes sense for the discom to avoid power purchase at such a rate, to have a cash flow cushion and ask the industrial consumer to back off or arrange power from some other sources. So some study on this is being done. So where on such occasions, the industrial demand response makes sense. And of course, when you are working on removing the cross subsidy through various other means, this tariff will come down, the industrial tariff. So that arbitrage also, that they're high paying consumer and they can't be subject to demand response will go away. Dr. Satish.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhishek. Thank you, Vish, for coming on. Any other questions from the audience? Okay, Rajesh.
My question is towards the Bali sir. I just want to know about the finances because most of the discoms in our country running into losses. So who are going to provide the infrastructure for demand response in our country in terms of incentive, in terms of hardware and other things? Thanks.
That's a really good question, and I think that is what we have to look at. And one is basically the program has to be, that's why the pilots are being done. Finances, if you would ask, there would not be no finances from our side or the government side or something. Discom are in such a shape that they would be looking for that, how to generate that finances. And I think from that perspective, something has to come up. I was going through the paper also and some other, I think, written documents. And in that something has been told, and I think that is, I think, wish list for us also. That is, we have to design a program where the, let's say, if a DR has to be taken as a dispatchable resource or otherwise, there are multiple things. One is a manual thing. One is like that, changing the DSN and other thing like that. There's a BE also come into play, Bureau of Energy Efficiency and Efficient Measures. Other thing, the industrial, as rightly pointed out by him. Another is the like VPP or something like that for grid operators. So these have to be worked upon in different departments. And in that, one point would be the cost of the, let's say, the software provider or the technological intervention. What would be the benefits? And what would be this cost, what we are looking at, the power purchasing cost or the peak load and everything. That model has to be taken. And if you ask me the cost of that, how to finance that, I think in that aspect, I will say, even in the smart grid arena, we have been able to formulate smart grid regulation in 2015, but some of the states have taken a cue from that. They've formulated their own smart grid regulations as per the requirements. But recently, I think a year back, in the COVID between just before that, Telangana has come out with smart grid regulation where they have provisioned some funds, let's say the 0.1% of the total revenue sales or AR or like that. That can be put up into this smart grid intervention. From there, these all things can be taken forward. Another thing, I think the actual finances, then that has to be worked at the utility level. Let's say the pilot, he was saying it has to be escalated to the 3 lakh level and then to the million and all that. That will give an impetus, how the fund will be conglomerated and how it will be accounted for. But if you ask for me, from my side, the government will be financing that? No. It will come suo moto. And when the realization happens, this is a workable model and this will save us the cost. Of course, this incentivizing of the customers and everything, that has to be fetched from that angle. And that the VPP and everything actor will come into play and that will take further. I think that is the way going ahead. Anything?
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll maybe I'll think make this question the last question. I'm just conscious of the time and
thank you panelists for very insightful discussion. I just wanted to know about the Tata Power pilot. How did we decide the timings of the event? Like when this event should be happening? Was it based on the actual studies or was it just decided on random basis to gauge the outcome or the impact of the program design?
Can I answer that? So, so basically, we know the load profile of the DISCOM, right? So there is a peak load. In Delhi, there are 2 peaks. One is in the afternoon, 3 to 4, something like that, and there is one in the night. So typically, the program that we did was at the residential segment, and we found that typically the peak in the domestic segment is in the night, when everybody's at home and the ACs are running. So we tried both the times, the afternoon and the night times, and we found that the response, the sheds that we got in the night were much better. So we had to experiment, but we figured out eventually that for the segment of residential customers, which is the time which works the best. Typically, it was in the nighttime hours.
So the say outcome was for managing the daily peak and not the peak that you mentioned, yearly peak, which is for 4 hours. Because for that different prediction and load forecasting was required.
So we did, the event was planned at the during the peak summers. Even now we're doing with Tata Power, this is the peak time, right? So given that there is a peak in the months of June, July or early August, during these days the day peak is also relevant. The day peak comes in the afternoon or it comes in the night. So you take the peak season, which is the summer season, and then you take the peak time in the 24-hour cycle. So that is the target that we have taken.
The recent one, at least direct feedback from the customer, it was night time. So you have my colleagues who told me it was 9 to 11 right prime time. So not easy, but they did it. So.
Yeah, and I think we have done some calculation in terms of national peak, and our estimate is that between 20 to 30% of the total peak is coming from the cooling load. So if you look at fans and air conditioners combined, so it is, I think, one of the prime, I think, end use loads that I think it needs to be shed. So yeah. So I want to thank all the panelists, but I know that Afsha and probably Bhaskar will take it over from here. So thank you again for very, very engaging and insightful, I think, remarks and feedback.
Thank you, everyone. With this, we've come to the end of our panel discussion as well. Very quickly, I'd like Dr. Bhaskar to come up here and felicitate Mr. Gaba and Mr. Arora, because they joined us only for this particular session. Ishan, can you please bring us a copy of the book? Thank you so much. Thank you. Dr. Bhaskar, can I please have you here to give the closing remarks for the day?
Thank you, Afsha. We've had a very interesting panel discussion, and when I kind of got more familiar with this report that was being finalized, because this report, AutoGrid and AEEE started working on this about a year ago. In a way, I would say a little ahead of its time in terms of bringing the important issues to the forefront. I think today, listening to the panel and to all the people in the hall, I've really come to know that there's a lot more that I really don't know. Don't know from the point of view of not the pilots, but the number of factors are so mind-boggling in terms of peak demand, in terms of technologies, in terms of how you communicate with the customer, in terms of how will the customer respond. And in all this, there are two things that we have to see that it happens for the good. Happens for the good for the power utility and the country. Happens for the good for the customer. If these two don't go hand in hand, the program is not likely to succeed. Perhaps both may not gain exactly the same kind of benefits. The benefits would definitely be different. And that is where we have this person called the regulator, who's trying to see what is it that I can do to balance the gains or the costs of different programs that we are doing. As was very interestingly mentioned, peak demand from certain categories comes for 4 hours in a year. But you need to have that power plant with you because you have to supply to that customer for 4 hours in a year. I was remembering what almost every one of us have in our homes, a microwave oven. 90% of us use it for maybe 10 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day. The power sector has to be ready for that 15 minutes for perhaps 10 million microwave ovens. The same thing holds good perhaps a little differently for washing machines or something like that. And this is where I believe we have the challenge. The private utilities have come in because they see value in it. Also, I believe that the private utilities are thinking ahead. The challenges of RE, the challenges of EV,
and the challenges of variable loads are very important. Another factor that is slowly creeping in, and this was mentioned in passing on the cooling loads, I know several people who are personally known to me. They have the most advanced Wi-Fi air conditioners in their homes in Gurgaon. And when they leave the office, half an hour before, the Wi-Fi is switched on so that the room is cool when I come inside the house. That is the kind of loads that will start creeping in. And this is where flexible demand can perhaps be of relevance. A small percentage, but as I said, it is slowly increasing. As was mentioned, 10% is the penetration of air conditioners today. I mean, and this is going to increase to 40 or 50%, and the penetration will be more at the higher end of the spectrum. People are not going to want the lower end of your air conditioners. They want things which purify the air. They want air conditioners that make you COVID-free and so on and so forth. Having said that, let me not get into too much because I know that the challenges are there. But one thing I believe AutoGrid, AEEE, the reason why we wanted to get into this was I believe it's time to go beyond the pilot. They have happened in private utilities in Delhi or in Bombay. We have to look at, as Shakti mentioned, UP has come forward. But I believe it is the time for people like AutoGrid, AEEE, working with other stakeholders, the National Smart Grid Mission, to look at how we can make a big bang impact. And that is what AEEE and AutoGrid would like to do. At this stage, without going into any more details, I want to thank AutoGrid, the team of Wish, Arvind, their communications team who has been here working with the AEEE team. In terms of putting this report together, we've interacted with a large number of stakeholders. We believe that this report now can probably be taken forward towards how I can launch a Big Bang program. AEEE would be extremely happy to partner with people like AutoGrid. They have a lot of experience on the ground. They have the technical wherewithal in terms of software. And that is where I believe we need to work together. Again, I would like to thank Mr. Bali for having joined us here, indeed at very short notice, having delivered his remarks on this interesting subject, and also thank the panel consisting of Mr. Abhishek Ranjan, Mr. Vikas, Mr. Siddharth. Arvind, of course, is part of the family, so I'm not specially thanking AutoGrid. AutoGrid has worked with us, and I'm sure we are going to work together in the next 2 or 3 years on how we can take this forward. I also would like to thank the back-end teams of both AutoGrid as well as AEEE who have worked hard to put together this program and make it a very interesting and challenging one. Thank you all once again for joining us here, and I'd like to invite you all to join us for lunch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it was great.
So Vish, I think maybe it's time for you to hit the bed. And thank you
Yeah, it
very
is
much,
indeed.
I think, for your participation.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and enjoy the lunch.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.
I request all the attendees also, whoever's been a part of the event, please come up for one group picture.